Good morning, Wabash. Today, speaking at Pioneer Chapel is Dr. Jim Cherry. Jim Cherry is an associate professor and chair of theater at Wabash, where he teaches classes in theater history and film and directs theatrical productions. He also serves as Wabash's faculty marshal and coordinates the film and digital media minor. In his free time, he likes to putter meaningfully around the house, hang out with Professor Crystal Benedicts of the Department of English, and roughhouse with their three amazing children, George, Rebecca, and Catherine. He is currently teaching a class, presenting his talk titled When the Mask Slips, or Some Thoughts on Theater in a Time of Plague, Dr. Jim Cherry.
Good morning, Wabash. I'd like to thank Brent Harris and the Sphinx Club for their generous invitation to speak today. And it is generous. It's a gift. Thinking about what to say has given me something to do other than watching push notifications show up on my phone and then muttering, "What fresh hell is this?" Something other than tinkering with the lighting in my study to make it as flattering as possible for Zoom, and something other than figuring out how to teach second-grade math to my son, which involves the use of rulers to a surprising degree. These talks compel the giver to get a bit reflective, and when times are as frenzied as they are, that is a gift as well. Chapel talks are few and far between for we givers of them. They often serve as signposts of our careers at the college. We look back at the ones we've given, lest we repeat ourselves, which would be embarrassing. They're little chapters of a history both individual and shared. In looking back, we see the things we were concerned about and excited about then, what was keeping us up at night then, how we felt then. When I gave my last chapel talk, things were very different in my life. In all of our lives. I gave that talk the week before the November 2016 election. I made a joke that it was, quote, an election in which, for the first time in our nation's history, neither of the major party candidates could have graduated from this college. I stand by that joke. It holds up really well. My kids were 4, 3, and 3. They hadn't started school yet. They're now 8, 6, and 6. And now they are in school, specifically the Mr. Daddy and Ms. Mommy school for charming, overactive children. They have a pretty good package, room and board included. Retention numbers are strong, so far. So this invitation to speak today, and this isn't going to be a long one, since we all shouldn't be staring at screens any more than we absolutely have to these days, has compelled me to tune out the madness of the world for a bit. And it is hard, because I am, maybe all of us are, experiencing a kind of plague brain, a state of distractedness, of forgetfulness, of weariness, coupled with occasional stomach-churning dread. Maybe it doesn't help that we're reminded that Shakespeare wrote King Lear, and Newton figured out gravity in motion, while in quarantine, because I'm not feeling super ambitious at the moment. Due diligence and risk assessment are pretty time-consuming. We're long-distance runners, us, who don't know where the finish line is. But to try and articulate what I am concerned and excited about now, what is keeping me up at night now, how I feel now, that I think I can do. Because I am, and I suspect that we all are, feeling a lot of different things right now. So this is where I am. And maybe this is where you are too, in part or in whole. First, I am frightened. I am afraid for the health and welfare of my family and my friends and my students and my colleagues, for the stability of our institutions and for our nation as a whole, for our collective future. I'm frightened that there are people in our country who aren't taking this pandemic as seriously as they ought to, and that there are those who are willing to exploit vulnerability for their own purposes and profit. I'm frightened because 18 months for a vaccine feels like a really, really long time. I mean, March felt like it lasted for a decade. So I am frightened. Second, I am very, very angry. I am angry at our leaders for not acting swiftly, sensibly, and humanely enough, for not moving with strong purpose buttressed by data, science, and good governance. I am angry that those with expertise and competence and honor were and continue to be dismissed cavalierly because they told and tell difficult truths. I am angry because the United States of America, that shining city on a hill, that last best hope for Earth, should be able to handle a crisis better than this, if we are who we say we are. So I am angry. And third, I am sad. I'm sad because you aren't here where you belong. That in 6 weeks, I'm not going to hug and take selfies with graduating seniors, to talk to their parents, to thank them for trusting us with their education. I'm not going to then head over to Rick Warner's to toast with my colleagues in the afterglow of this good, exhausting, profoundly edifying work that we are so fortunate to do. I'm sad because I can't finish the semester in the classroom where I belong. I'm sad because I'm not directing a play right now. I'm sad because social distancing isn't natural for me or for any of us, because ours is an education that is built on face-to-face interaction, to the ebb and flow of conversation, to sharing the same air and space. It is so central to who we are that through senior comps, we literally don't let anybody graduate from this place until you can do that. Social distance is what we seek to dispose of here. Wabash is like theater in that way, a big communal, collaborative project meant to discover great truths, forge connections, take risks, work hard, laugh harder. So it isn't supposed to be this way for us. So I'm sad. And fourth, I am proud. I'm proud of my Wabash colleagues, and frankly, the educators across the world, from kindergarten teachers to PhD dissertation advisors, who are, each and every one of them, attempting to build a virtual pedagogical plane in flight. For my students, who are doing the work of the liberal arts, which isn't easy under the best of circumstances, and in these circumstances can be extremely difficult. There are Wabash students who now have to work full-time jobs to help their families, to perform child and elder care, to stay in spaces and have schedules that are not conducive to the scholarship we expect from them. And to them, I say, we see you. And we want to help you, because this institution has a mission that could not be more important than it is right now: to provide a rich man's education for a working man's price in order to shape and make good, bright, ethical, empathetic men for a world which desperately needs them. So I am proud, too. Those are my feelings. To put things in terms of dramatic structure, we are in the Inciting Incident. In the 19th century, German writer Gustav Freytag conceived of a triangle, which was meant to describe the archetypal narrative arc in European literature, grounded in the patterns found in Greek tragedy and Shakespeare. An exposition, first, in which all of the background information is delivered, followed by an inciting incident, which provides the action and provokes the action of the plot, which builds in intensity until it reaches a climax, and then after which is the falling action. And the tension relaxes into the denouement, where the knot is untied and the plot is resolved. Now, if he were writing today, Freytag would have probably added a small bump for the post-credit scene. But now, we're in the inciting incident, at the point in the story when Hamlet meets the ghost of his father, learns of his uncle's treachery, the moment when Luke holds the lightsaber for the very first time. For our own circumstances, it's perhaps useful to think of the Oedipus of Sophocles, a play written in the wake of a pandemic which killed a quarter of the population of Athens, Greece, 2,500 years ago. Oedipus is the ruler of Thebes, a city beset by a terrible plague. Quote, the herds are sick, the children die unborn, and labor is in vain. The god of plague and pyre raids like detestable lightning throughout the city, end quote. Now, Oedipus is a smart man. He solved the riddle of the Sphinx, after all. He's a good ruler, sensitive to his subjects' cries for help, if, he's a bit egocentric. He addresses the crowd of his suffering citizens and says, quote, each of you suffers in himself alone his anguish, not another's, but my spirit groans for the city, for myself, for you, end quote. In the Inciting Incident, Oedipus's brother-in-law tells him that an oracle has revealed that the plague in the city exists because the murderer of the previous king, Laius, is still at large. For the city to heal, he must be found. The crime must be purged. Oedipus tells his people, once he hears this, that he will, quote, once more bring what is dark to light. What will be brought to light in the climax of the play is the terrible truth that Oedipus himself is the plague, an inadvertent father murderer, mother seducer. He leaves the city blinded in his own darkness, but with a new knowledge of his identity. Oedipus learns who he really is. The knot unties. So, we haven't reached the climax yet, never mind the falling action into the denouement. We are at the beginning of our play now, with an ending that isn't known. Hamlet avenges his father. Luke blows up the Death Star. But what we do know for sure is that our story is one that we're writing together. Professor Nelson spoke last week about the tensile strength of community, even when individually separated and cloistered. Ours is a community that remains. Ironically, the connections between us and between everyone just become so clear in this distanced, bemasked moment. As all our EQ students read a couple of weeks ago in Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail, we are all, quote, caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly, end quote. And this connective tissue reveals itself in ways that we don't anticipate, manifests itself in fashions that we don't recognize in the routine of everyday life. This plague, as terrifying and destructive as it is and has been, helps us see these things, brings them to light. So we Wabash professors pride ourselves on accessibility, the never stated but practically written in stone open door policy of our offices. We are here to be there for students, even when we're not here together. I think that students often can't recognize how much you are there for us. One of the few things I've come to appreciate in this incredibly weird time are my Zoom classes with my EQ students. They show up 3 times a week, dressed to play, more or less, ready to engage with text, to argue, and to learn from each other. Our conversations have really helped me deal with all of this. Students should know that professors take solace in their company more than they know. Solace comes in odd places too, because, we're all binge watching Tiger King now, the perfect entertainment for times so surreal and mad. And perhaps then it's sensible to look at the work of mad surrealists. When COVID-19 became real for us, I think, is when our classes went virtual. It was a shock to all of our systems. I found myself, as I think many of my colleagues did, thinking about my own discipline. For me, it was about the various ways in which theater has responded to crisis. Shakespeare's theater often closed due to plague. I thought of Tony Kushner's Angels in America, the stage history of which our college plays a not small part, which articulated the terror of the AIDS epidemic in epic spiritual terms and showed how we all are, regardless of sexual orientation, woven into the national fabric together. I thought of Ann Nelson's The Guys, likely the first play produced about 9/11, which told a true story about a woman who wrote eulogies for firefighters killed that day and enacted rituals of trauma and grief a few blocks away from the rubble of the towers. And I remembered The Theater and the Plague, an essay written by the avant-garde French writer and director Antonin Artaud. Artaud is a singular figure, a revolutionary, intensely provocative thinker about theater and performance. Artaud's most famous performance piece, Spurt of Blood, from 1925, reads like a children's story about the book of Revelation, written by the Marquis de Sade. It is full of shocking, staggering, fundamentally unperformable imagery, inaugurating what he would later call a theater of cruelty. For Artaud, theater artists needed to shunt aside easy psychological realism, to reconnect theater to its ritualistic and religious roots. The theater of cruelty was not meant to cause physical pain or violence, but to shatter an audience's illusions. Artaud envisioned a theater erupting with light and sound, provoking visions of terror and revelation. The descendants of Artaud's vision can be found today in immersive theater productions, performance art, experimental cinema, rock concerts. Artaud's searing vision came at a cost to him. He was addicted to heroin and opiates for much of his life, institutionalized multiple times, died of a drug overdose in a psychiatric hospital at 54. The Theater and the Plague was published in 1938 as part of a much larger text of Artaud's manifestos and essays called The Theater and Its Double. It's a particularly disquieting piece to read. Artaud writes of his vision of theater as like a plague, capable of spreading with impunity, infecting the brains and lungs of audiences. Because, and I think that this is useful, plague, for Artaud, isn't good or bad in and of itself. It is a mechanism for revelation. It is not evil, but it reveals what is. Artaud writes, quote, "The theater, like the plague, releases conflicts, disengages powers, liberates possibilities. And if these possibilities and these powers are dark, it is the fault not of the plague nor of theater, but of life." End quote. One person hoards hand sanitizer to sell at inflated prices on Amazon. Another shops for all of the elderly people on their block so they don't have to go outside. It is the fault not of the plague nor of theater, but of life. So while plagues cause widespread suffering and death, they also can tell us who we are. Artaud writes that the plague and theater, quote, "causes the mask to fall, reveals the lie, the slackness, baseness, and hypocrisy of our world. It shakes off the asphyxiating inertia of matter which invades even the clearest testimony of the senses. And it invites us to take, in the face of destiny, a superior and heroic attitude they could never have assumed without it." End quote. What we see now in this, our inciting incident, is that mask slipping a bit. Suddenly we recognize collectively the obvious truth. Difficult, dangerous, essential work of so many working class people were taken for granted. Grocery clerks, utilities workers, truck drivers, healthcare workers are basically keeping this whole thing afloat at this point. They're largely forgotten, unless the world turns upside down, which it has. Suddenly it becomes obvious that wouldn't it be great if these people had paid sick leave so they wouldn't have to choose between coming to work and spreading a highly contagious virus and staying home and not being able to make their rent? That millions of Americans who lost their jobs in the past 2 weeks because of a pandemic ought to have access to health insurance outside of their work. Hypocrisy is not the only thing that it reveals, though. For Artaud, the plague invites us to take, in the face of destiny, a superior and heroic attitude they never would have assumed without it. Crisis gives us the opportunity to be the people we need to be. The person you would imagine you would be in a crisis is you right now. So what do we ask of ourselves and of you? Think critically, act responsibly, lead effectively, live humanely. How shall we enact these goals and values in a time of crisis, of social distancing, of plague? What about the world that will be on the other side of it? This is going to be something for us to all figure out together, and we will. Based on what we see when the mask slips, we will need to imagine new possibilities for the world we will have when this ends. We'll do that together too. So, in preparation of that, in moments of calm, please be reflective about what all of this means. Consider what we ought to become in the aftermath. All hands will be on the oars. Consider what we are learning now about our potential capacity for collective action. Nations throughout the world are reacting to this crisis in varying ways, to varying degrees of success, but they're all reacting. Shutting down economies, millions and millions of people doing the critical, vital work of working from home. And maybe it's seeing the pictures of an LA without smog, or deer and fox wandering in the streets of major cities. But what if COVID-19 shows that we can tackle seemingly impossible problems, like climate change, because we can act with concerted purpose? As for now, and I'll end here, since we're all caught in the inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny, we really need to be kind to each other and to ourselves. To paraphrase the playwright Paulo Vogel, when our leaders fail us, and they have, compassion won't. When science fails to deliver what we need today, empathy won't. When this all becomes too much, and it probably will for all of us, kindness will not fail. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. One quick announcement, please continue to go online to the Wabash College calendar at www.wabash.edu/calendar for the latest updates regarding online events and activities, such as Alumni Association virtual meetings, future chapel talks, the annual awards chapel on April 23rd, and the virtual commencement ceremony scheduled for May 17th. Now, wherever you may be watching, please rise and join in the singing of Old Wabash.
From the hills of Maine to the western plain, or where the cotton is blowing, the gloomy shade of the northern pine to the light of the southern seas, there's a name, a leer, and a color we cheer wherever we find him blowing. Tears shall rise from our longing as the Lord of the where the days of the western sun is turning and flush and glowing. Across the skies and gorgeous stars and all we love so well. We love to sit as the shadows flit and praise it in song and story. We love to shine as the light that's our good. Prayers are always alive.